And here we are, in this calm and quiet moment. There is nothing to consider tonight, nothing to think about, just the feeling of comfort, as I share with you a simple, soothing story about a king whose life was a story in itself, a strange and winding tale whispered in the dark halls of a long-gone empire. Tonight, we're not just looking at history. We are going to feel it, walking through a palace of shadows, where a family's greatest strength became its most devastating curse. Before we drift too far, if you feel a connection to this place, you're welcome to leave a quiet like or subscribe. Think of it not as a task, but as leaving a soft footprint in the sand before you continue your journey inward. And if you feel so inclined, you can leave a comment with your city and the time on your clock. It's a quiet way of knowing that even in the stillness of the night, we are all listening together, under the same moon. And so, find that gentle darkness in your room, perhaps with a soft blanket pulled a little closer, as we begin our slow drift into tonight's tale. Imagine, if you will, a map, not a map of paper and ink, showing coastlines and continents, but a map made of faces. You are walking down a long, impossibly long, gallery in a Spanish palace. The air is cool and smells of old stone and beeswax. The only light comes from flickering candelabras, making the shadows of the past dance on the walls. And on these walls hang the portraits of a single, powerful family, the Habsburgs. As you drift past each canvas, you begin to notice something. It starts subtly. A portrait of an emperor, stern and proud, his chin a little more prominent than most. Then his son, the same feature, perhaps a touch more defined. Then you pass his granddaughter, and there it is again. That same strong jawline, the same full lower lip. Uncle, niece, cousin, nephew. The portraits blur into one another. A dynasty of shared blood and shared features. This isn't just a family resemblance. It's a statement. A signature carved directly into their bones. This is the famous, or perhaps infamous, Habsburg jaw. A feature so distinct it became a royal seal, a physical mark of their identity. And as you walk deeper into this gallery of generations, you're each tracing the story of how this family built the greatest empire the world had ever seen. An empire so vast, it was said the sun never set upon it. From the silver mines of Peru to the spice islands of the Philippines, all of it answered to the person whose portrait hung in this hall. And how did they keep such a sprawling, magnificent creation together? Not with armies, not entirely. They did it with marriage. But these were not your typical fairy tale alliances. The Habsburgs had a simple, and as it would turn out, devastatingly flawed, philosophy. Keep the power in the family. All of it. Don't let a single castle, a single province, a single ducat of silver escape the bloodline. So they married each other. A Habsburg of Spain would marry a Habsburg of Austria. An uncle would marry his niece. A first cousin would marry a first cousin. Their family tree, you realize as you gaze at these portraits, doesn't branch out like a healthy oak. It curls inward, twisting back on itself like a wreath, or even a knot. For a time, it worked. It created a closed loop of power, a fortress of blood that no outsider could penetrate. But nature has rules, ancient and unwritten rules that even kings and queens cannot ignore. And with every generation, with every cousin-to-cousin union, the genetic code became a little more frayed, a little more fragile. The family signature, that proud, jutting jaw, was just the most visible sign of something much deeper. A quiet fragility was being woven into their line. Historians still debate how aware the Habsburgs were of what they were doing. Did they connect the series of infant deaths, the sickly children, the physical ailments, with their marital choices, or did they see these tragedies merely as the will of God, tests of their faith? It's a question that hangs in the air of this quiet gallery. For them, marrying a stranger from another royal house was a political risk. Marrying your niece was a political certainty. And in the high-stakes game of empire, certainty was worth almost any price. You paused before one portrait of a king, his long face and heavy jaw making it look, to our modern eyes, like a caricature. You learn a quiet, strange detail. That powerful jaw often made it difficult for him to chew his food properly. Imagine a man who commands continents, who signs decrees that change the lives of millions, struggling with the simple act of eating a meal. It's a humbling, humanizing thought, a small crack in the golden facade of absolute power. As you continue your slow walk, you sense a change. The portraits grow more extreme, the jaw becomes heavier, the features more pronounced. The proud family resemblance is beginning to look like a burden. The genetic map is leading somewhere. The twisting, inward curling family tree is growing towards its final, inevitable fruit. You feel a sense of foreboding, a quiet melancholy. You are walking towards the end of a dynasty, towards the last portrait in this long, shadowed hole. A portrait of a boy who would inherit not just an empire, but the accumulated weight of every choice his ancestors ever made. A boy born to carry a curse in his very blood. The final portrait in that long, shadowed gallery seems to shimmer at the edges. The gilded frame dissolves, and the scent of oil paint and old canvas gives way to something else. The faint, cool smell of incense and cold stone. This still, painted world gives way to a real one, and you find yourself standing not in a gallery, but in the heart of the Royal Alcazar of Madrid. It is the center of the world, the heart of a global empire, and yet, it is the quietest place you have ever been. There is no music, no laughter. The vast, cavernous rooms are draped in heavy tapestries that seem to absorb all sound. Courtiers glide by, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. They are ghosts dressed in black, so much black. The Spanish court, you realize, is a world drained of color, while other courts in Europe might dazzle with silks of blue and green and crimson. Here, sobriety is the ultimate expression of power. It is a severe, almost religious devotion to formality, expressed in endless yards of black velvet and stiff, starched troughs that cage the neck. You are witnessing the infamous Spanish court etiquette, a set of rules so rigid, so complex. It was a language all its own. Every single moment of the day, from the moment the king awoke to the moment he slept, was a choreographed performance. Who could hand him his shirt? Who could pour his water? Who could open a door for him? These were not simple tasks. They were matters of immense political importance, privileges fought for and jealously guarded by the great families of Spain. The king was not a man, he was a living idol. The sun around which all these dark-clad planets slowly, meticulously revolve. He was, in a very real sense, a prisoner of his own majesty. You watch as a nobleman approaches the king. He doesn't simply walk up and speak. He performs a series of bows, each one precise, measured. He moves with a slow, deliberate grace that seems unnatural, almost painful. It is a world without spontaneity, a world where a simple human gesture could cause a diplomatic incident. You feel the urge to shift your weight, to cough, but you suppress it. The air itself feels heavy with unspoken rules, a silent, invisible cage that surrounds everyone, from the lowest servant to the monarch on his throne. Historians still argue about the purpose of this suffocating formality. Was this rigid dance a display of ultimate power? A way to elevate the monarch to a near-divine status, untouchable and awe-inspiring, by making the king's person so sacred, so difficult to approach? It reinforced the idea that he was chosen by God, separate from ordinary mortals. Or was it the opposite? Was it a sign of profound weakness? A system so terrified of change and instability that it ossified into meaningless ritual? Perhaps this obsession with form was a mask, hiding the fact that the empire's foundations were beginning to crack under their own immense weight. The sheer absurdity of these rules is almost comical, until you realize they were matters of life and death. You hear a whispered story about one of the Spanish queens. Years later, while out riding, her horse stumbled, and she was thrown, her foot caught in the stirrup. She was being dragged, in mortal danger. The courtiers around her looked on in horror, but none dared to touch her. The person of the queen was sacred. To lay a hand on her was a crime punishable by banishment or even death. Finally, the brave gentleman ignored the protocol, rushed forward, and freed her, saving her life. And what was their reward? They had to immediately flee the country, seeking refuge abroad until a royal pardon could be arranged. They saved their queen's life, but they broke the rules, and in the Spanish court, the rules were more important than a life. Now imagine this world. This silent, black, unyielding palace. It is a machine made of etiquette and tradition. It is not a home. It is not a place for warmth, for comfort, for a gentle touch. There is no room here for weakness, no allowance for sickness, no patience for a child who is slow to learn, slow to walk, slow to speak. It is a stage, and everyone must play their part perfectly. You look around at these somber, unsmiling faces, these figures moving through the shadows like pieces on a chessboard, and you feel a deep, creeping chill. This is the world that is waiting. This is the cradle that is being prepared. Into this silent, suffocating, unforgiving cage, a baby will soon be born. A boy who will be asked to rule the world, but whose own body will be a constant betrayal. A boy who will need more care, more gentleness, more understanding than any child, but who will be born into a place that has none to give. The palace holds its breath, not in joyful anticipation, but in a kind of grim, fearful hope. The air in this silent palace grows colder still, and your focus narrows, drifting towards a single man. He sits in a high-backed chair, the weight of an empire pressing down on his shoulders, visible in the weary lines around his eyes. This is King Philip IV of Spain. He is a man of contradictions, a lover of art, poetry, and theatre, the great patron of the painter Velázquez, whose stunning portraits have captured the soul of this court. Yet he is also a monarch presiding over a slow, painful decline, an empire bleeding silver and soldiers and endless, unwinnable wars. But tonight, his mind is not on war or art. It is on a much more primal, dynastic fear. Nos. His first queen is gone. More devastatingly, his only son and heir, the handsome and promising Balthasar Charles, has died suddenly. The future of the Spanish Habsburgs, the continuation of his line, has vanished. The king is in his 40s, an old man by the standards of the day, and he is without a son. The great machinery of the empire requires an heir, and so a new marriage must be arranged. The solution, as always for the Habsburgs, lies within the family, and this is where the story takes a turn that feels more like a strange, dark fairy tale than history. You see, there was already a bride chosen for the young Prince Balthasar Charles. A perfect Habsburg match. She was his first cousin, the daughter of the Holy Roman Emperor and Philip's own sister. Her name was Mariana, a young artist living in the far more vibrant and colorful court of Vienna. She was preparing for a life as Queen of Spain, wife to a boy her own age. Then, the news arrived like a black-draped carriage. Her fiancé was dead. Her future was erased. But the alliance was too important. The need for an heir too desperate. The Spanish court sent a new proposal. The marriage would still happen. The bride would remain the same, but the groom would change. Mariana of Austria would not be marrying her cousin, the prince. She would be marrying his father, the king, her own uncle. Imagine this young girl, barely a teenager. Her world is turned upside down. The man who was to be her father-in-law is now her betrothed. She must leave her home, her family, everything she has ever known, to travel to a stern and foreign land and marry a man almost 30 years her senior. A man who is her mother's brother. You can almost feel the chill as she says her goodbyes. Her youthful Austrian gowns packed away, knowing she will soon be dressed in the severe black of the Spanish court. Their family tree is no longer just a wreath. It's a knot so tight you can barely trace the lines. He is her uncle. She is his niece. Any child, will have a grandmother who is also their aunt, and a father who is also their great-uncle. Genetically, it's a hall of mirrors, an echo chamber where the same ancestral voices bounce back and forth, getting louder and more distorted with each generation. Modern science can calculate this, giving it a dry, cynical name, an inbreeding coefficient. For a child of first cousins, it's high. For the child of an uncle and niece, it is dangerously higher. Their future son would have a genetic makeup more tangled than many royal houses could achieve in centuries. Historians continue to debate the personal feelings of King Philip in this matter. Was it a cold political calculation, the grim duty of a king who saw his niece as nothing more than a vessel for the next heir? Or was there a deep, personal tragedy in it for him? Was he a grieving father, forced by circumstance to take his dead son's intended bride, a constant, living reminder of the boy he had lost? We can't know what was in his heart, but we can see the results. You witness Mariana's arrival in Spain, a strange and lonely procession. She is met with all the ceremony the court can muster, but it is a cold, formal welcome. A little-known fact about these royal unions is the almost clinical nature of them. The bride was often subject to inspections and examinations by court physicians and midwives upon arrival, to ensure she was healthy and fit for her primary purpose, childbearing. It was a humiliating, objectifying process, a stark introduction to her new reality. She was not a wife, she was a state asset. And so they are married. I somber king and his teenage niece. A union born of death and desperation. The entire empire, from the sun-scorched plains of Castile to the humid jungles of the Americas, now focuses its collective hope and prayer on a single point: the new queen's womb. She must produce a son, a healthy son, a son to inherit the world. But as she stands beside her uncle husband at the altar, a shadow seems to fall over them both, a long, dark shadow cast by generations of choices, a shadow that will stretch all the way into the future, and into the cradle of the son they will eventually have. The palace of black clothes holds its breath. You can feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable. It's in the way the courtiers whisper in the shadowed corners, their voices low and urgent. It's in the anxious glances exchanged between ministers and ambassadors. It's in the solemn processions to the royal chapel, where endless prayers are offered up for a single, specific miracle. A son. Every creak of the floorboard, every rustle of a silk dress, seems to echo with the same unspoken question: is there news? Queen Mariana, once the vibrant Arctic from Vienna, is now the vessel of this collective hope. You can see her, a lonely figure in the vast, cold rooms at the Alcazar. Her youth is being consumed by the solemn duty of her station. The court physicians hover, their faces grim. They prescribe strange diets, offer unsolicited advice, and bleed her for ailments both real and imagined. Her body is no longer her own. It is a matter of state. Its every change and symptom discussed and debated in the highest councils of the kingdom. The first pregnancy comes, and a fragile hope blossoms. The court allows itself a small, collective sigh of relief. But the hope is short-lived. A daughter is born, the infante Margarita Teresa. You might recognize her. She is the little blonde princess at the center of Velázquez's masterpiece, Los Meninas, a fleeting moment of childhood innocence captured forever on canvas. She is beautiful, and she is loved. But she is not a boy. The Solution law, which forbade women from inheriting the throne, wasn't strictly enforced in Spain, but a male heir was always preferred. He was the only true guarantee of stability. A daughter could be married off, her inheritance potentially passing to a foreign king. A son stayed. A son was the anchor. So the prayers continue, growing more fervent. The kingdom waits. Mariana becomes pregnant again, and again. The hope is tempered with fear. This time, a son is born, Philip Prospero. The name itself means prosperous. A desperate prayer embedded in his very identity. But from the moment he is born, It is clear something is wrong. He is a sickly, fragile infant. His body so weak that he is swaddled in amulets and holy relics to ward off the evil spirits the court believes are plaguing him. Velasquez painted him too, a haunting portrait of a pale, solemn toddler in a red dress, his eyes large and sad, as if he understands the impossible weight that rests upon him. He is the heir to the Spanish Empire, but he cannot even sit up without support. The entire kingdom watches his every breath, praying he will survive infancy. He does not. He dies before his 4th birthday. The grief that descends upon the court is a physical thing, a heavy shroud of despair. King Philip IV, an aging man, has now buried 2 sons, 2 heirs. The curse, the whisper of God's displeasure, grows louder. Is the family being punished? Is this the price for some unknown sin? No one dares to say the word inbreeding, but the fear is there, a ghost haunting the royal nursery. Historians still debate the true emotional toll this took on Philip and Mariana. The formal court records speak only of pious resignation and state mourning, but letters and private accounts hint at a deeper, more human sorrow. Can you imagine the pressure on Mariana? A young woman in a foreign land, married to her uncle, whose sole purpose is to produce a healthy male heir, and she keeps seeing her children sicken and die. It's a relentless, heartbreaking cycle of hope and devastation. You find yourself in the royal chambers, a silent observer. The doctors are a constant presence. A strange, little-known detail of the time is the prevalence of etiogretanic harm, illnesses caused by the doctors themselves. Their cures were often more dangerous than the diseases. They would purge and bleed these already weak children, convinced they were removing bad humours from the body, when in reality they were just making them weaker. Little Philip Prospero was likely subjected to these painful and useless treatments, his fragile body enduring the desperate, misguided efforts of the best medical minds of the age. Now, Mariana is pregnant for the 6th time. The atmosphere is no longer one of hopeful anticipation. It is one of grim, fearful necessity. There can be no more failures. The king is old. The empire is fragile. The wolves, France, England, the Dutch, are circling, waiting for the Spanish lion to grow weak. This child, this one last chance, must be a healthy boy. He must live. So the kingdom doesn't just hold its breath. It prays with a collective, desperate force. Every church, every monastery, from Madrid to Mexico City, is filled with the murmur of prayer. They are praying for a king. They are praying for the survival of their world. As the Queen goes into labor on a cold November day in 1661, the silence in the palace is absolute. Every courtier, every minister, every servant is frozen, waiting for the first cry of a newborn child, waiting to hear if it will be the cry of a savior, or just another heartbreaking prelude to a tiny coffin. The fate of an empire hangs on the sound that would emerge from behind a closed door. From behind the heavy, ornate door of the birthing chamber, a sound finally emerges. It is a cry, thin and weak, but it is a cry nonetheless. A wave of relief, so profound it is almost silent, washes through the waiting corridors of the Alcazar. A child is born. A few moments later, the doors open. A chamberlain, his face a mask of practiced neutrality, steps out and makes the announcement. It is a boy. His name is Charles. A solid, kingly name. He will be Charles II. At his christening, the celebrations are lavish, almost desperately so. Cannons fire salutes. Banquets are held. The court throws off its funereal black fur brief, dazzling display of color and relief. On the surface, it is a scene of immense joy. An heir is born. The succession is secure. The Habsburg line will continue. God has answered their prayers. But if you look closer, if you drift through the celebrating crowds and into the quiet of the royal nursery, you see a different story. The joy is a fragile veneer, stretched thin over a deep, gnawing anxiety, because the child at the center of all this celebration is not a robust, healthy baby. He is tiny and alarmingly frail, His head is too large for his body, his limbs are weak, and his little face is already marked by the unmistakable sign of his heritage. The jutting jaw, the heavy lower lip, so pronounced even in infancy that it makes it difficult for him to nurse. The court physicians gather around his cradle like crows. Their whispers are constant. Worried hum. They note every slight fever, every cough, every sign of weakness. The wet nurses are chosen with extreme care, their own health and family history scrutinized. This is not just a baby. He is the most precious and fragile object in the entire empire, a flickering candle flame that must be shielded from the slightest breeze. He is given a string of titles so long it's a wonder he can bear their weight. Prince of Asturias, Prince of Girona, Duke of Montblanc, Count of Barcelona. He is the heir to Spain, to the Netherlands, to Naples and Sicily, to a vast and sprawling collection of territories in the Americas and the Philippines. He is, in title, the most powerful child on earth, but in his cradle, he is just a sickly baby, struggling for breath. Years later, the people will give him a different name, a title born not of ceremony, but of whispered superstition and fear. El Hikazi, the Bewitched One, the Hicks. It's a name that captures the profound unease that surrounded him from the very beginning. To the common people, and even too many in the court, his endless ailments and strange appearance could not be explained by nature. It had to be the work of dark forces. I curse. A hex placed upon the royal line by an enemy, a heretic, a witch. It was easier to believe in witchcraft than to confront the terrifying, unspoken truth that the curse was not from a witch, but from within. It was in his blood, a legacy passed down from all the kings and queens in the long, shadowed gallery. Historians still debate the exact medical conditions that afflicted Charles II. The diagnosis, looking back through the centuries, is a complex and speculative one. It's a grim tapestry woven from the threads of eyewitness accounts, ambassadors' reports, and autopsy records. The most likely culprit is severe genetic damage resulting from generations of inbreeding. He probably suffered from a combination of ailments, including pituitary hormone deficiency, which would explain his stunted growth, and distal renal tubular acidosis, a kidney disorder that can cause weak muscles and bone problems. But at the time, these were unknown concepts. All they saw was a child who was unwell, chronically, terrifyingly unwell. You can almost feel the strange, superstitious atmosphere of the nursery. It smells not just of milk and linen, but of holy water and medicinal herbs. Alongside the physicians with their jars of leeches, there are priests murmuring prayers and blessings. A peculiar detail from this time is the sheer number of religious relics that were brought to the infant prince's side. Splinters of the true cross, bones of saints, pieces of cloth that had touched a holy person. They were laid in his cradle, sewn into his clothes, all in a desperate attempt to invoke a divine cure. The nursery of the heir to the Spanish throne was a battleground between the emerging science of the 17th century and the deep-seated religious faith and superstition of the medieval world. As you watch this tiny, fragile prince in his gilded cradle, surrounded by worried faces, you feel a profound sense of pity. He has no idea what awaits him. He doesn't know that his very existence is a political statement, his health a barometer of the empire's stability. He doesn't know that his entire life will be a struggle against his own body, a battle he is destined to lose. For now, he is just a baby, but the world is already writing his story, casting him not as a king, but as a symbol, a living embodiment of a dynasty's magnificent, tragic, and irreversible decline. The frail cry from the cradle fades into the slow, steady ticking of a grand clock in the corner of the room, marking the passage of a childhood unlike any other. You watch as the infant prince, Charles, grows into a toddler. But growth is perhaps too strong a word. It's more of a fragile unfolding. Like a pressed flower that might crumble at a touch, his survival through infancy is seen as a miracle in itself, a testament to the power of the kingdom's prayers. That the miracle is a fragile one. You are now a silent guardian in the royal nursery, which feels less like a child's room and more like a sealed medical ward. The windows are kept shut, draped with heavy curtains to keep out the unhealthy night air and the unpredictable humors of the outside world. The floors are scrubbed clean, not for hygiene as we know it, but to purify the space of any lingering spiritual malevolence. The air is thick with the scent of chamomile and burnt rosemary, herbs thought to have protective properties. In this sealed environment, you watch over a little boy who is treated not like a child, but like a priceless, paper-thin porcelain vase. He is not allowed to walk. The fear that he might fall and break a bone, or simply shatter from the exertion, is so intense that he is carried everywhere, well into his toddler years. You see him being moved from room to room in the arms of a nobleman, his little legs dangling uselessly. He is rarely put down. His world is a succession of arms and naps, a cushion, passive existence. He is not allowed to catch a chill, so he is perpetually wrapped in layers of woolen velvet, even in the stifling heat of a Madrid summer. You can almost feel the suffocating warmth, the prickle of sweat on his pale skin. He is not allowed to exert himself, so there are no games of chase in the palace gardens, no rough and tumble play with other children. In fact, there are no other children. His world is one of solemn, black-clad adults who look at him with a mixture of reverence and clinical concern. This extreme coddling, born of love and terror, had a devastating effect, because he was never allowed to crawl or to try and stand. His muscles remained weak and underdeveloped. His bones, already likely fragile from his genetic conditions, never gained the strength that comes from use. The very measures taken to protect him were, in a cruel irony, ensuring his continued frailty. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. They treated him like he was made of glass, and so his body never learned to be anything else. Historians have debated the long-term consequences of this upbringing for centuries. Was his physical weakness entirely genetic, or was it severely exacerbated by this bizarrely overprotective environment? The consensus is that it was a tragic combination of both. Nature gave him a fragile constitution, and his upbringing ensured it would never have a chance to strengthen. His body was a cage, and his guardians, in their loving fear, just kept reinforcing the bars. You witness moments of quiet, strange sadness. A court painter is brought in to capture the prince's likeness, and the little boy must be held still, propped up with pillows, his expression vacant. A new suit of miniature armor is presented to him, a kingly gift. But it's a cruel joke. He doesn't have the strength to stand in it, let alone wear it. It's on a stand in the corner of the room, a gleaming, empty symbol of the strong king he is supposed to become, a king his body will never allow him to be. One particularly bizarre detail of his early life involves his food, because of his severe Habsburg jaw, a condition known as mandibular prognathism. His upper and lower teeth did not meet correctly. Chewing was difficult, sometimes impossible. His food had to be pre-chewed for him. Imagine this. The heir to a global empire, unable to perform the most basic act of eating. Wet nurses or servants would chew the meat and other solids first, then pass the softened pulp to the little prince. It's a shocking, visceral image that highlights the profound reality of his physical limitations. He was completely, utterly dependent on others for his most basic survival. As you stand in the corner of this hushed, gilded prison, you watch the little boy. He rarely smiles. He rarely speaks. His large, pale eyes seem to take in the world with a kind of passive, silent bewilderment. He is the center of this universe, the axis on which an empire turns, but he is also its most helpless inhabitant. The clock on the wall continues to tick, each tick a second closer to the day this fragile, silent child will be expected to put on a crown and rule the world. And as you look at him, swaddled in velvet and fear, you can't help but wonder how he will even learn to stand, let alone bear the weight of a kingdom. The ticking of the clock grows louder, and the years begin to slip by. 4 years old, 5, 6, the age when other boys, even royal ones, are learning to ride ponies. to read Latin, to understand the basic shape of the world they will one day command. But for little Charles, the milestones are different. They are far more fundamental, and far more frightening for the court that watches his every move. You are there in a vast, sun-drenched room in the Alcazar. The courtiers stand along the walls. Their faces a mixture of forced encouragement and barely concealed panic. Today is a great day. The king, Charles I, is going to learn to walk. He is not a toddler taking his first wobbly steps. He is a boy of primary school age. For years, he has been carried, a passive observer of the world from the safety of an adult's arms. But his father, the aging King Philip IV, has decreed that it is time. An heir cannot be carried forever. Two powerful dukes, their chests covered in medals and honors, are given the task. They hold Charles up by his arms, his small feet in their soft leather shoes dangling just above the polished floor. You can see the fear and confusion in the boy's eyes. He doesn't understand. His legs are strangers to him, thin and weak from disuse. They are not things for standing on. They are just there. Look, Your Majesty, they urge. Their voices a strange mix of command and pleading. They lower him slowly, and for a moment, his feet touch the ground. You can feel the collective intake of breath in the room. His ankles buckle immediately. His knees tremble. There is no strength in them. He would collapse in a heap if the two noblemen weren't holding his entire weight. He lets out a small, frightened whimper. This is not a joyful first step. This is a terrifying ordeal. The same, the one like it, is repeated day after day. A frustrating, painful ritual. The attempts to make him walk are a state secret, a matter of national security. Ambassadors from rival courts are constantly trying to bribe servants to find out. Is the king healthy? Is he strong? Can he even stand on his own? The stability of Europe, in a very real sense, depends on the strength in this one little boy's legs. Speech is another silent battlefield. He is slow to talk, his first words coming much later than for most children, and when he does speak, his pronounced jaw makes enunciation difficult. His words are thick, slow, hard to understand. Tutors are brought in, the best in the kingdom, but the lessons are a struggle. He is restless, apathetic, with a short attention span. He shows no interest in the alphabet, in numbers, in the maps of the vast empire he is supposed to rule. Historians and doctors have long debated the source of these developmental delays. Was it purely a result of his physical ailments, which left him in a state of constant, low-level pain and discomfort? Or was there a cognitive component as well, another tragic consequence of his genetic inheritance? It is one of the great, unanswerable questions of his life. We know he was treated as slow, but it is impossible to distinguish the effects of his physical suffering and his bizarre, isolating upbringing from any underlying intellectual disability. He was never given the chance to develop normally, so we will never know what his true potential might have been. You can imagine the frustration of his tutors. How do you teach a boy who doesn't want to learn? How do you explain the complexities of statecraft to a child who is still struggling with the basics of walking and talking? A quirky, and rather sad, detail that has survived is that one of the few things that could capture his attention was the ringing of church bells. He was fascinated by them, and for a time, a set of small bells was brought into his chambers. One of the few toys he was known to have enjoyed. It's a poignant image. A boy king, unable to grasp the world of politics and power, finding a moment of simple joy in the clear, uncomplicated sound of a bell. His father, King Philip IV, watches all of this with a growing sense of despair. He is old. His health is failing, and his heir, his last hope, is this fragile, delayed child. In his will, he will write with heartbreaking honesty about his son's weakness, acknowledging that Charles is not yet ready, perhaps will never be ready, to rule. He sees the truth, and it terrifies him. The great Spanish Empire, the global superpower, is to be inherited by a boy who can barely speak his own name. As Philip lies on his deathbed in 1665, the crown of the largest empire on earth passes not to a man, not even to a promising youth, but to this bewildered, sickly 4-year-old child. The kingdom has a king, but the throne, for all intents and purposes, is empty. The great bell of the Alcazar tolls, a low, solemn sound that echoes across the rooftops of Madrid. King Philip IV is dead. The throne is not empty for long. In a somber ceremony, the 4-year-old Charles II is proclaimed king. You can see him, a small, bewildered figure swallowed by the enormous throne, his feet dangling high above the floor. He holds a miniature scepter in his tiny hand, but he has no idea what it means. He is the king, but he cannot rule. And so, another figure steps out from the shadows of the court. She is no longer just the queen consort. She is the queen regent, Mariana of Austria. The young Arctiscus who married her uncle is now the most powerful woman in the world. Her son is the king, but she will be the one to wield his power. You see her now, not as a grieving widow, but as a ruler. The vibrant colors of her Austrian youth are gone forever, replaced by the severe black widow's weeds of the Spanish court, a habit she will wear for the rest of her life. Her face, still young, is set in a mask of grim determination. Her position is incredibly precarious. She is a foreigner in a court that is deeply suspicious of outsiders. She is a woman in a world where power is meant to be held by men, and she is the regent for a king whose life hangs by a thread. Every cough from the royal nursery, every feverish night, sends a tremor of fear through her and through the entire government. Her power exists only as long as her son breathes. You find yourself in the council chambers, a silent observer of her regency. It is a world of intrigue, a viper's nest of competing ambitions. The great noble houses of Spain, the grandees, have been kept in check by the absolute power of the king for generations. Now, with a child on the throne and a foreign woman as regent, they see their chance. They circle her, offering advice that is really a demand, professing loyalty while secretly plotting to increase their own power. Mariana knows she cannot trust them, so she turns to the only people she can, those who are loyal to her personally. Her chief advisor is a man who becomes one of the most hated figures in Spanish history, her personal confessor, a German Jesuit priest named Juan Everardo in it hard. He is intelligent, shrewd, but he is also an outsider. Just like her, a German priest running the Spanish government, to the proud Spanish nobility. This is an unforgivable insult. You can feel their resentment, the low, constant hum of anger beneath the surface of the court's formal etiquette. They mock him in secret, giving him the insulting nickname Nitardo, the Spanish pronunciation of his name, which sounds unpleasantly like the word for bird's nest. It's a small, petty detail, but it speaks volumes about their xenophobic contempt. The Queen Regent's rule is a constant, desperate balancing act. She is trying to hold together an empire that is crumbling at the edges. Wars with France drain the treasury. Pirates and smugglers bleed the American colonies of their silver. Famine and plague stalk the Spanish countryside. And at the center of it all, she is trying to raise a son who remains alarmingly frail. Historians have often been unkind to Mariana, painting her as an incompetent and easily manipulated ruler, a pawn in the hands of her for own favorites. But in recent years, a more nuanced view has emerged. The debate continues, but many now see her as a tough, pragmatic survivor, a woman who used the limited tools at her disposal to defend her son's inheritance against overwhelming odds. She was not a brilliant strategist, perhaps, but she was fiercely protective, a mother fighting like a lioness to her cub. You can see that fierce maternal instinct in her relationship with Charles. While the court sees him as a political symbol, a weak king to be managed, she sees her son. She continues the smothering, overprotective care of his childhood, perhaps to an even greater degree. She resists the attempt by the council to impose a more rigorous, manly education on him. She shields him from the harsh realities of his position, from the complex and tedious affairs of state. In her eyes, he is still just a fragile child who needs to be protected from the world. But in doing so, she also prevents him from ever learning how to rule it. Her iron grip on power, her reliance on foreign advisors, and her failure to solve the kingdom's deep-seated problems create a dangerous cocktail of resentment. The grandees of Spain are not just insulted. They are looking for a champion. A true Spaniard who can oust the German priest and the Austrian queen and restore Spanish pride. And they find one, waiting in the wings. A charismatic, handsome, and far more popular figure is about to step onto the stage. He is everything the little king is not. Strong, confident, and a proven military leader. And he happens to be the king's older half-brother. The suffocating stillness of the Alcazar is broken by a name whispered at first, then spoken with increasing boldness, in the taverns and barracks of Madrid. Don Juan José de Austria. He is the ghost at Mariana's feast, the living embodiment of everything her son is not. To understand who he is, you have to drift back in time, just for a moment, to the reign of the late King Philip IV. The old king, for all his piety, had a very human weakness. He had a long and passionate affair with an actress named Maria Calderon. From this union, a son was born, an illegitimate son. But Philip IV, in a move that was both scandalous and deeply revealing, did something extraordinary. He officially recognized the boy. He gave him the grand name of Don Juan José de Austria, a name traditionally reserved for heroic royal bastards, most famously the victor of the great naval battle of Lepanto. You can almost see this boy's childhood, a strange parallel to Charles's. While Charles was being wrapped in cotton wool in the silent palace, Don Juan was being raised for a life of action. He was given a prince's education, trained in the arts of war and statecraft. He grew into a man who was the perfect Habsburg prince. If only he had been born on the right side of the blanket. He was handsome, charming, intelligent, and a genuinely capable military commander. The common people adored him. They saw in him the strength and vitality that was so painfully absent from the legitimate royal line. He was their hero, their dashing soldier prince. Now you were back in the present, in the tense atmosphere of Mariana's regency. Don Juan is a grown man, a popular general with the loyalty of the army, and he watches from his estates in Aragon as the Austrian queen and her German priest roam the country. And his view, into the ground. He sees himself as the true heir to his father's spirit, the rightful guardian of his pathetic little half-brother, and the only man who can save Spain from the foreigners. You can feel the tension building, like the air before a thunderstorm. Don Juan becomes the focal point for all the discontented nobles. For everyone who resents Mariana and Dennet hard, he is their champion. They write to him, they plot with him, they urge him to act. The situation becomes a slow-motion power struggle. A duel of wills between the Queen Regent in Madrid and the popular hero in the provinces. Mariana, for her part, is terrified of him. She sees him, correctly, as the single greatest threat to her and her son. She tries to keep him far away from the court, giving him commands in the Netherlands or Italy, anywhere but Spain. But he always returns, more popular than ever. The clash is inevitable. In 1616, Don Juan decides to make his move. It's not a bloody coup, not in the way we might imagine. It's a very Spanish kind of rebellion. A mixture of military threat and political theater. You witness him marching from Barcelona towards Madrid, not with a full army, but with a small, armed retinue. It's a show of force, a declaration of intent. He issues a manifesto, demanding the dismissal of the hated priest. In it hard. The news spreads through the capital like wildfire. The people of Madrid, tired of foreign influence and economic hardship, are on his side. Mariana is trapped. The nobles on her council are untrustworthy, some secretly supporting Don Juan. The army's loyalty is questionable. She has no one to turn to. You can see her, pacing the cold rooms of the palace, a cornered queen. For a moment, it looks like she might be toppled. But Mariana is a survivor. She yields. She agrees to Don Juan's demand. In a face-saving move, she has Enid Hard appointed as an ambassador to Rome, a gilded exile. It's a humiliation for her, but she has saved her regency. She has sacrificed her born to protect her king. Don Juan has won the battle, but not the ruler. He has proven his power, but he has not seized it. Historians still debate why he didn't go further. Why didn't he march into Madrid and take full control, perhaps declaring himself regent? Was it a flicker of loyalty to his father's memory and his little brother's crown? Or was it a shrewd political calculation, knowing that an open seizure of power would be seen as treason and might unite the fractious nobility against him? It's a fascinating what-if of history. For now, an uneasy truce settles over the kingdom. Don Juan retires from court. His point made. Mariana remains in power, but she is weaker, more isolated than ever. She has a new favorite, a slick Andalusian courtier named Fernando de Valenzuela, who will prove to be just as unpopular as Enid Hard. The fundamental problem remains unsolved. The king is still a child, growing older but not stronger, and the handsome half-brother is still out there. A hero in waiting, a constant, looming shadow that stretches all the way to the steps of the throne itself. The years continue their slow, relentless march. The child king is no longer a child. The calendar pages have turned, and Charles is now approaching his 14th birthday. In the traditions of the Spanish monarchy, this is a momentous occasion. 14 is the age of majority. The day he turns 14, the regency of his mother, Mariana, will officially, automatically, end. He will no longer be a king in name only. He will be the absolute monarch of the Spanish Empire. You can feel a new wave of anticipation and anxiety ripple through the court. For a decade, the kingdom has been ruled by a committee of regents, first dominated by the German priest Enid Hard, and now by Mariana's new favorite, the ambitious upstart Fernando de Valenzuela. The government has been a chaotic mix of factional infighting and indecisive policy. Now, finally, there will be a king, a single, ultimate authority. But as you look at the boy who is about to inherit this absolute power, the anxiety only deepens. Charles is a teenager, but he seems much younger. He is still painfully thin and frail, his movements awkward and uncertain. He has finally learned to walk on his own, but his gait is shuffling and unsteady. His speech remains thick and difficult to understand. His education has been a spectacular failure. He can barely read or write. He has no grasp of mathematics, of geography, of the complex political landscape of Europe. He spends his days in a kind of listless apathy, his primary interests still childish and simple, playing with his dogs, or watching the jesters and dwarfs who are kept at court for entertainment. On November 6, 1675, the day arrives. A grand ceremony is held. The great nobles of Spain, the ambassadors of foreign powers, the high officials of the church, they all gather in the Hall of Mirrors. You are there, a silent observer in the crowd. The doors swing open, and King Charles II enters. He is dressed in magnificent robes. The brilliant silks and gold thread a stark contrast to his pale, vacant expression. He walks slowly, hesitantly, to the throne. His mother, the Queen Regent, formally relinquishes her power. She steps back, her face unreadable. Charles is now the king, the absolute ruler. But as he sits on the throne, looking out over the sea of bowing heads, you can see that nothing has really changed. He is a phantom on the throne. The power has been transferred to him, but he has no idea how to use it. The strings that control him are still there. They are just held by different hands now. Immediately, a new power struggle erupts, more vicious than ever before. Who will control the king? Who will whisper in his ear? His mother, Mariana, has technically retired from power, but she has no intention of disappearing. She works from behind the scenes, trying to maintain her influence through her network of loyal courtiers. Her favorite, Valenzuela, now tries to position himself as the king's chief minister. And out in the provinces, the king's half-brother, Don Juan Jose, sees his moment. With the regency officially over, he can now claim he is not rising against the queen, but coming to the aid of the true king, to free him from the clutches of his mother's corrupt cronies. Historians still debate Charles's own awareness of these events. Was he a complete puppet, a passive pawn in their games? Or did he have moments of clarity, brief flashes of understanding or preference? Some accounts suggest he had a genuine, if childish, affection and admiration for his dashing older brother, seeing him as the strong figure he himself could never be. Others suggest he was terrified of everyone, easily swayed by the last person who spoke to him. The truth is likely somewhere in between. He was a deeply damaged young man, adrift in a sea of intrigue, clinging to whatever person seemed to offer the most comfort or security at that moment. You witness a bizarre and pathetic scene. A group of grandees, loyal to Don Juan, managed to get a private audience with the young king. They plead with him to sign an order for Valenzuela's arrest and to summon Don Juan to court. Charles is confused, frightened. He looks to his mother for guidance, but she is not there. He hesitates. They press him. Their voice is urgent. Finally, almost randomly, he makes a shaky signature on the document. It is his first major act as king, a signature he likely did not even understand. The fallout is immediate. Don Juan marches on Madrid again, this time to the cheers of the populace. Valenzuela is arrested and exiled. The Queen Mother, Mariana, is sent away from court, banished to a convent in Toledo. For a brief, shining moment, Don Juan Jose de Austria, the illegitimate son, is the master of Spain. He is the prime minister, the trusted advisor, the beloved brother of the king. It seems that a new, more vigorous era is about to dawn, but the phantom on the throne remains a phantom. And controlling a phantom is much harder than it looks. The young king is a void, then power. Like nature, abhors a vacuum. With Don Juan Jose now firmly in control, a new energy seems to sweep through the dreary corridors of the Alcazar. The rule of the Queen Mother and her unpopular favorites is over. Spain, it seems, is back in the hands of a Spaniard. Don Juan is ambitious, energetic, and full of plans for reform. He wants to overhaul the tax system, rebuild the army, and restore Spain's tarnished prestige in Europe. But he knows that all his plans depend on one thing: stabilizing the monarchy, and that means securing the future. The young king, Charles, now in his late teens, needs a wife. He needs an heir. The question of a royal marriage was not a matter of love. It was the single most important piece of foreign policy. The choice of a bride would signal a major shift in alliances. For years, under his mother's Austrian influence, the assumption was that Charles would marry another Habsburg cousin from Vienna. It was the family way. But Don Juan has other ideas. He sees the suffocating embrace of the Austrian Habsburgs as part of the problem. He wants to break the cycle. He looks instead to Spain's great rival, the rising sun of Europe, France. An alliance with France, sealed by a marriage, could bring peace, trade, and a powerful new ally. It is a bold, controversial plan, and the French court of the Sun King, Louis XIV, is receptive. Louis has a niece, a beautiful, vibrant, and intelligent young princess named Maria Louise d'Orleans. She is the daughter of the king's flamboyant brother, Philippe, Duke of Orleans. She has grown up at the glittering, sun-drenched palace of Versailles, the most sophisticated and luxurious court in the world. A place of music, art, ballet, and witty conversation. You can almost feel the culture shock in the air. Imagine Maria Louise. She is the epitome of French style and spirit. But no, she is told she is to become the Queen of Spain. She is to marry a man she has never met. A young king who is spoken of in hushed, pitying tones throughout Europe. He is known to be sickly, deformed, and simple-minded. The French court is a place of gossip, and the whispers about "Tel he kaisi aid" are cruel and unrelenting. Marie-Louise is said to have wept, to have pleaded with her uncle, the king, not to send her away. The story goes that Louis XIV told her, with icy finality, "It is the greatest thing you can do, to become Queen of Spain. I could not wish a greater destiny for my own daughter." The matter was settled. You are there as she makes her long, slow journey from the light of Versailles to the shadows of Madrid. It is a procession of hope. The people of Spain, weary of the grim Habsburg court, are desperate for a change. A beautiful young French queen could be a symbol of a new beginning, a breath of fresh air. They line the roads to cheer her, throwing flowers at her carriage. And then she arrives. The meeting between the bride and groom is one of the most poignant scenes in royal history. You see Charles, awkward and shy, his face a mask of nervous anticipation. He has seen her portrait and is utterly captivated. And you see Marie-Louise, young and beautiful, stepping out of her carriage, taking her first look at her husband. Whatever horrors she might have imagined, the reality is likely just as jarring. He is small and frail. His jaw so pronounced it is a struggle for him to speak clearly, his eyes holding a vacant, childish innocence. Historians have long debated what she truly felt in that moment. Was it revulsion, pity, or perhaps a flicker of kindness for this broken boy who was now her king and her husband? Her letters home are, of course, diplomatically cheerful, but between the lines, one can read a profound sense of loneliness and isolation. She has been dropped into a world that is the complete opposite of the one she knew. The vibrant colors of France have been replaced by the eternal black of the Spanish court. The witty conversation has been replaced by suffocating silence and rigid etiquette. Etta Small, telling detail about her arrival, her pet parrots, which she had brought with her from France, were taken away. The Spanish court considered them too frivolous. Their bright colors and noisy chatter unbefitting the dignity of a queen. It was a small cruelty, but a powerful symbol. Her entire world, everything that was familiar and joyful, was being stripped away. Yet, in the beginning, there is a glimmer of light. Charles, for his part, is utterly, completely, and Puppy is HLY devoted to his new wife. He follows her around the palace like a lost dog. He showers her with jewels and gifts, and for the first time in his life, he seems to show a flicker of genuine happiness. Marie-Louise, in turn, seems to treat him with a gentle, patient kindness. She learns to understand his slurred speech. She walks with him in the gardens. She brings a brief, beautiful ray of sunshine into his dark and lonely life. The court watches, holding its breath once more, hoping that this fragile affection might blossom into something more. Hoping that the pretty French queen can perform the one miracle that Spain so desperately needs, provide an heir. The brief glimmer of light that Marie-Louise brought to the Spanish court begins to dim under a relentless, suffocating pressure. The affection between the young king and queen is real. A gentle island in a sea of formality. Charles adores her, and she, in turn, has developed a tender, almost maternal fondness for her husband. But their personal feelings are irrelevant to the court and the kingdom. The queen has one primary, non-negotiable duty: to produce an heir, preferably a son, and the royal cradle, month after month, year after year, remains tragically, unavailable empty. You can feel the atmosphere in the palace begin to change. The initial hope that surrounded the new queen coalesced into suspicion, then into open hostility. The silent, black-clad courtiers watch her every move. Her every month is a public event, a subject of whispered speculation in the corridors. When her monthly courses arrive, the news is a national disappointment, a state crisis. The hopes of an empire up into the cycles of her body, and her body is failing to deliver. The blame, in the deeply misogynistic world of the 17th century, falls squarely and almost exclusively on her. No one dares to suggest that the king, the frail and sickly Charles, might be the problem. The king's virility is a symbol of the kingdom's strength. To question it is tantamount to treason. Therefore, the queen must be barren. You witness the desperate and bizarre cures she is forced to endure. The court physicians, the same men whose predecessors bled and purged the king's siblings into early graves, now turn their dubious attentions to Marie-Louise. They prescribe foul-tasting herbal concoctions. They subject her to endless bleeding to balance her humors. She is forced to wear holy relics and amulets against her skin. The cold metal a constant reminder of her perceived failure. There are public prayers and religious processions. Great spectacles of faith designed to beseech God to open the queen's womb. Imagine the humiliation. You see her, kneeling for hours on the cold stone floor of a cathedral. The eyes of the entire court upon her, knowing that they are all praying for her to overcome a failure that is not her own. She is young, healthy, and comes from a famously fertile family, but in Spain, she is deemed defective. Historians still debate the precise cause of the couple's childlessness. Modern medical understanding points overwhelmingly to Charles. His severe genetic defects likely rendered him sterile. The autopsy performed after his death would note that he had only a single, atrophied testicle. He was almost certainly incapable of fathering a child. But this was a truth no one could speak aloud. It was the great, silent secret at the heart of the monarchy. The pressure takes a terrible toll on Marie-Louise. Her famous French fiercity begins to fade. The laughter is heard less often. Her letters home become tinged with a deep melancholy. She is a prisoner in a gilded cage, surrounded by hostile faces. Blamed for a situation she is powerless to change. Her only comfort is her husband, Charles, who, in his simple way, remains devoted to her. He seems to be the only one who doesn't blame her, the only one who offers her unconditional affection. But his comfort is not enough to shield her from the court's relentless hostility. A particularly cruel and strange rumor begins to circulate. A piece of court propaganda likely spread by the anti-French, pro-Austrian faction. They whisper that the queen is intentionally avoiding pregnancy, that she secretly rides horses too hard, or drinks iced water, or takes other measures to remain barren, hoping that her husband will die and the Spanish throne will fall into French hands. It is a baseless, vicious lie, but, in the paranoid atmosphere of the court, it takes root. They begin to see her not as a barren queen, but as a foreign agent, a beautiful traitor. You see her, walking in the manicured gardens of the Buen Retiro Palace, a splash of French color in a monochromed Spanish world. She tries to create a small echo of Versailles, with music and poetry, but the attempts feel hollow. The weight of expectation is crushing her spirit. Every meal she eats, every hour she sleeps, is scrutinized. The curse of the Habsburgs, the genetic decay that has hollowed out the king's body, is now being projected onto her. She is being blamed for the emptiness of his bloodline. The empty cradle in the palace is not just a personal tragedy. It is a ticking clock, counting down the seconds to a dynastic catastrophe. And every tick of that clock sounds like an accusation, pointed directly at the lonely French queen. The years in the silent, gilded cage grind on, each one etching new lines of sorrow onto Queen Marie-Louise's face. The vibrant, laughing girl who arrived from Versailles is now a pale, melancholic woman. Her existence has married to a single, repeating cycle of hope and public disappointment. The once whispered criticisms about her childlessness have become a dull, constant roar in the background of her life. You walk beside her through the cold, echoing halls of the Alcazar. The courtiers still bow, their movements as precise and formal as ever. But their eyes are cold. She is a failure. In their view, she has failed in her one essential duty. The pro-Austrian faction at court, which had opposed the French marriage from the start, now feels vindicated. They worked tirelessly to undermine her, spreading rumors, isolating her from any potential allies, ensuring her every day is a fresh misery. Her only true companion remains the king. Charles's devotion to her has never wavered. In his simple, almost childlike way, he loves her. He seems blissfully unaware of the political storms that rage around her. He sees her sadness, but he cannot comprehend its source. He tries to comfort her with gifts, a rare bird in a silver cage, a priceless diamond. But these are just more bars on her prison. You witness tender, pathetic scenes. The king, struggling to articulate his feelings, trying to make his wife smile, while outside their chambers, the great powers of Spain plot against her. Her health begins to decline, whether from a specific illness or the slow, corrosive effect of stress and despair. She starts to weaken. She loses her appetite. Her famous love of horse riding, one of her few escapes, is abandoned. She spends more and more time in her chambers, writing long, sad letters back to friends. Letters that read like pleas from a forgotten exile. There is a long-standing and much-debated theory among historians that Marie-Louise was slowly poisoned. The pro-Austrian faction, it is argued, saw her as an obstacle. As long as she was alive, the French alliance held, and there was no chance of the king remarrying and potentially producing an heir with an Austrian bride. Poison was a common political tool of the era, difficult to detect and easy to deny. There is no definitive proof, no confession, no smoking gun, but the circumstances were deeply suspicious. Her sudden decline, the political motives, the rumors that swirled at the time, it all creates a dark and compelling cloud of possibility. Was her final illness natural, or was it helped along by a hidden hand in a court that had come to despise her? The question remains one of history's unsolved mysteries. One day in early 1689, after a day of riding, she is struck by a severe abdominal pain. It is sudden, violent, and agonizing. The court physicians are summoned. They rush to her bedside. Their faces grim. They do what they always do. They bleed her. They apply hot poultices. Their remedies are useless, likely even harmful, aggravating whatever internal ailment is consuming her. You are a silent presence in the room as she lies dying. She is only 26 years old. Charles is inconsolable. He kneels by her bed, holding her hand, his face streaked with tears, a picture of pure, uncomresented grief. He is losing the only source of light and kindness he has ever known, according to a famous, though perhaps embellished, account. In her final moments, Marie-Louise turned to him and said, "Your Majesty might have other wives, but you will never have another who loves you as I do." And then, she is gone. The brief, 10-year chapter of the French Queen is over. The court goes into official mourning, the sea of black. But beneath the somber rituals, there is a palpable sense of relief in many quarters. The obstacle has been removed. The slate has been wiped clean. Charles is utterly devastated, lost in a fog of sorrow. He has lost his wife, his friend, his protector. He wanders the palace, calling her name. But the machinery of state does not stop for a king's grief. Even as Marie-Louise's body lies in state, the council is already meeting. The question is not if the king will remarry, but who he will marry, and how soon. The curse of the empty cradle is more potent than ever. The king is approaching 30. There is no heir. The survival of the Spanish Habsburg line, and the peace of Europe, depends on finding a new queen, a new womb, a new hope. And this time, the pro-Austrian faction will make sure there are no mistakes. They will choose the bride. The king's grief, though profound, is a luxury the empire cannot afford. The black mourning clothes are barely put away before the diplomats and ministers are back at their work, their maps and dynastic charts spread out on polished tables. The French experiment is over. It has deemed a failure. The court, now firmly under the influence of the Austrian faction, turns its eyes back toward the familiar heartland of the family, Germany. They need a new bride for Charles, and this time, she will be one of their own. Their choice falls upon a German princess, Maria Anna of Neuburg, on paper. She is the perfect candidate. She comes from an astonishingly fertile family. Her mother had 23 children. She is known to be healthy, robust, and a staunch Catholic, she is a Habsburg in spirit. If not in name, the alliance is quickly arranged. The proxy marriage is celebrated. And once again, a foreign princess begins her long journey to Madrid to become Queen of Spain. But if the court was expecting a quiet, pious, and submissive bride who would focus solely on the nursery, they were in for a rude shock. You were there when Maria Anna arrives, and from the first moment, it is clear that she is nothing like her predecessor. Where Marie-Louise was gentle and melancholic, Maria Anna is forceful, ambitious, and fiercely intelligent. She is not a pawn in the game. She intends to be a player. You see her stepping into the rigid formality of the Spanish court like a storm front. She has bright red hair and a commanding presence. She is not intimidated by the black-clad grandees or the suffocating etiquette. She has come to Spain not just to be a wife, but to be a political force, to secure Austrian influence, and to advance the fortunes of her own German family. Her first meeting with Charles is a stark contrast to the gentle encounter with Marie-Louise. Charles, still mourning his first wife, is hesitant and withdrawn. Maria Anna, on the other hand, is pragmatic and direct. She sees her husband for what he is, a weak, damaged man who holds immense power. He is the instrument she must learn to play. Almost immediately, she begins to consolidate her power. She surrounds herself with a clique of German advisors and ladies-in-waiting, creating her own court within the court. This German camarilla, as it becomes known, is viewed with intense suspicion and hatred by the Spanish nobles. It is history repeating itself. Another foreign queen with her foreign favorites. But Maria Anna is far more politically astute than Queen Mariana, Charles's mother, had ever been. She quickly understands that the key to power is control of the king. You witness her methods. She uses a canny mixture of flattery, maternal care, and subtle intimidation. She caters to Charles's simple needs, ensuring his favorite foods are prepared. His rooms are comfortable, but she also plays on his fears and insecurities. She becomes his gatekeeper, deciding who gets to see him, filtering the information that reaches him. The king, accustomed to being managed by a strong woman, first by his mother and then, more gently, by his first wife, falls easily into the new dynamic. He becomes utterly dependent on Maria Anna. But the central problem, the one that defines everything, remains. The royal bedchamber is once again the focus of national anxiety, and once again, it remains fruitless. The months turn into years, and there is no sign of a pregnancy. Maria Anna, the famously fertile German princess from the famously fertile family, cannot conceive. The debate among historians shifts. With Marie-Louise, there was the unspoken possibility that the fault lay with the king. But now, with a second, healthy, robust queen also failing to conceive, the truth becomes an undeniable, terrifying reality, even if it is never spoken aloud. The king is sterile. The Habsburg line of Spain is a genetic dead end. It would die with Charles. Maria Anna understands this truth far better than anyone. She knows there will be no heir. This realization transforms her role. She is not the future mother of a king. She is the queen of a dying dynasty. Her political ambitions, therefore, shift from the nursery to the succession. If there is no heir, then the great question is, who will inherit the vast Spanish Empire when Charles dies? This becomes the single most important political question in all Europe. And Maria Anna intends to have the deciding vote. Her goal is to ensure that the inheritance passes to her own family, specifically to the Austrian Habsburgs, a branch represented by her nephew, the Archduke Charles of Austria. The last decade of the 17th century becomes a Cold War fought within the walls of the Spanish palace, a war for a dying man's throne. The palace, which was once a place of suffocating silence, now hums with a new kind of energy, the electric tension of conspiracy. You are no longer just an observer of courtly life. You are navigating a treacherous labyrinth of whispers. Every tapestry might hide a listening ear. Every friendly conversation might be a veiled interrogation. The Alcazar of Madrid has become the epicenter of a geopolitical earthquake, and the courtiers are all trying to guess where the fault lines will crack. With the certainty that the king will die childless, the court splits into factions, each one a constellation of interests orbiting a different candidate for the throne. It's a shadow war, fought in private audiences wishing you a pleasant experience, with secret letters, and with rivers of foreign gold. You drift among them, an invisible presence. First, you sense the powerful Austrian faction, energized and led by the formidable Queen Maria Anna herself. Her chambers are its headquarters. Here, the German language is spoken freely, and letters fly back and forth to Vienna. Her candidate is her nephew, the Archduke Charles, to her and her supporters. This is the only natural, legitimate choice. It keeps the empire in the Habsburg family. It honors centuries of tradition. They argue that it is a matter of blood, of destiny. You see the Austrian ambassador, a man of immense influence, having quiet, late-night meetings with the Queen, strategizing, planning, and distributing generous pensions, a polite word for bribes, to key Spanish nobles. Then you move through the halls and feel the pull of a rival power, a force that is, in many ways, even more formidable. The French faction. They too have a candidate, and his claim is just as strong, if not stronger. He is Philip, Duke of Anjou, the grandson of the Sun King, Louis IV. His claim comes through his grandmother, Maria Theresa of Spain, who was King Charles II's own half-sister. She had renounced her claim to the Spanish throne when she married Louis IV. But the French argued that this renunciation was invalid because her massive dowry was never fully paid. It's a legalistic argument, a diplomatic loophole big enough to sail a fleet through. The French ambassador is as cunning and well-funded as his Austrian counterpart. You see him cultivating relationships with Spanish grandees who are tired of the Habsburgs, who resent the Queen's German influence, and who believe that a powerful French king is the only one who can protect the Spanish Empire from being torn apart. They argue for pragmatism over tradition. France is the rising power in Europe. An alliance with it means security. An alliance with the fading power of Austria means perpetual war and decline. And then there is a third, smaller, but still significant group. The Bavarian faction. Their candidate is a child, the young Electoral Prince of Bavaria, Joseph Ferdinand. His claim is also through a Habsburg mother, and he is seen by many, especially the English and the Dutch, as the perfect compromise candidate. He is not a French Bourbon, nor an Austrian Habsburg. His accession wouldn't upset the delicate balance of power in Europe. You see his supporters, often the more moderate Spanish nobles, arguing that he represents a third way, a path to peace that avoids domination by either France or Austria. The King, Charles, is the bewildered, tragic center of this storm. Each faction vies for his ear, for his favor, for his wavering, uncertain attention. You see the Queen trying to coax him, to guide his hand, to make him see that her Austrian nephew is the only choice. Then you see the Archbishop of Toledo, a powerful French sympathizer, gaining a private audience, speaking to the king of his sacred duty to keep the empire whole and strong, a feat only the French candidate can achieve. It is a psychological war, and Charles is the battlefield. His mind, already fragile, is battered by these competing pressures. One day he seems to lean towards the Austrians, the next towards the French. His moods, his brief moments of clarity or confusion, are reported by spies and ambassadors back to every capital in Europe. The health of the King of Spain, his every cough, his every seizure, his every good day or bad day, is the most crucial piece of intelligence in the world. Historians continue to debate how much Charles himself understood of this great game being played around him. Was he merely a puppet, his strings pulled by the strongest hand, or did he, in his own way, comprehend the terrible weight of the decision he would have to make? Some sources suggest he was terrified of partitioning the empire, that his one overriding desire was to pass it on intact, just as he had received it. This fear would become the central lever that all sides would try to pull. You feel the paranoia in the air. A nobleman who speaks too favorably of the French candidate in the morning might find himself suddenly posted to a remote, undesirable governorship in the afternoon, a quiet punishment arranged by the Queen. A minister who seems to be leaning towards the Austrian cause might receive a very generous and unsolicited gift of French wine. The Palace of Whispers is a dangerous place. A wrong word, a misplaced loyalty, can be the end of a career, or worse, and all the while, the king's health continues to fail, and the vultures continue to circle ever lower. Amidst the high-stakes game of succession, the daily life of the court continues its strange, ritualized dance, and it is in the small, peculiar details of this life that you can feel the true texture of the era, a world teetering between medieval superstition and burgeoning modernity. The fear that permeates the palace is not just political. It is a primal, physical fear, the fear of poison. In a court where a single death could change the fate of a continent, every meal served to the king is a potential weapon. You are in the royal kitchens, a vast, cavernous space of smoking hearths and clattering copper pots. The scene is one of organized chaos. But at its center is a ritual of intense security. The king's food is prepared separately, under the watchful eye of his personal physician. Every ingredient is inspected. Every cook and servant involved has been vetted for loyalty. When the meal is ready, it is not simply carried to the king's chambers. A formal procession is formed. You watch as a high-ranking nobleman is given the honor of carrying the silver tray, covered with a velvet cloth. He is flanked by guards. Before the king takes a single bite, a taster must sample the dish. This person, often a trusted servant or court official, takes a small portion of each food and drink, then waits for a period of time to see if they fall ill. It's a job with considerable risk, but also immense honor. The life of the taster is a shield for the life of the king. The fear of poison was not an idle paranoia. Royal and noble houses across Europe had a long and storied history of using assassination to solve political problems. While historians debate the actual frequency of successful poisonings versus the fear of them, the anxiety was very real and shaped the daily routines of the powerful. One of the king's few pleasures in his restricted life was a love for spiced chocolate. This was not the solid chocolate bar we know today, but a hot, frothy, and often bitter drink, a legacy of Spain's New World conquests. It was a luxury beverage of the elite, often flavored with cinnamon, chili, and vanilla. You can almost smell the rich, exotic aroma wafting from a silver cup. But even this simple pleasure was fraught with danger. The chocolate pot would have its own set of elaborate security rituals. There was a particular fear of slow-acting poisons and detectable substances mixed into the rich, dark liquid that could mimic the symptoms of a natural illness. In the king's final years, as his health visibly collapsed, Queen Maria Anna and her German faction openly accused the French faction of attempting to poison Charles through his beloved chocolate, a claim that was never proven but which ratcheted up the court's paranoia to a fever pitch. This obsession with hidden threats extended beyond food. The king's clothes, his bed linens, even the water he used for washing, were all subject to scrutiny. A peculiar and little-known court position was the garde-robe, the keeper of the wardrobe. This was not just a valet. This official was responsible for the physical security of the king's garments, ensuring they weren't laced with a contact poison or infested with some magically cursed vermin. You can feel the suffocating atmosphere this created. The king is a prisoner not just of etiquette, but of a constant, invisible siege. He is walled in by layers of security, by tasters and guards and physicians, all trying to protect a body that is already collapsing from within. The irony is profound. While the court expends enormous energy protecting him from imaginary external threats, the assassin's poison, the witch's curse, the real poison is already in his blood. a genetic inheritance that is far more lethal than anything a French agent could put in his chocolate. You watch him one evening, sitting alone in his chambers. A servant brings him his nightly cup of chocolate. The rituals are performed. The taster does his duty. The guards stand by. Finally, the cup is presented to the king. He takes a slow sip. One of the few simple, uncomplicated pleasures he has. But in this court, nothing is simple. Nothing is uncomplicated. Every sip, every bite, every breath is a move in a deadly game. A game being played for the prize of his magnificent, crumbling, and cursed inheritance. As the king's physical condition deteriorates, the line between medicine and magic, between the physician and the priest, begins to blur completely. The court's desperation grows, and in their desperation, they turn to increasingly strange and extreme measures. The battle for the king's health becomes a bizarre, three-way struggle between science, faith, and outright superstition. You are in the king's bedchamber. The air is thick and heavy, smelling of medicinal poultices, beeswax scandals, and incense. In one corner, the royal physicians gather, their faces long and somber. They are the best educated medical minds in Spain, trained in the classical theories of Galen and Hippocrates. They speak in hushed Latin, debating the king's humours. Is his blood too hot? Is his friend too cold? Their treatments are brutal and primitive. They bleed him relentlessly, hoping to drain the bad blood they believe is poisoning his system. You can see the pale, almost translucent quality of his skin, a sign of chronic anemia likely induced by the doctors themselves. They prescribe purgative endemetics, violent concoctions of mercury and other toxic substances designed to violently cleanse his body, leaving him weaker than before. In another corner of the room, you see the priests. They represent a different kind of power, a different approach to healing. They see the king's illness not as a matter of unbalanced tumors, but as a spiritual crisis. A test from God, or worse, a punishment for the sins of the kingdom, or even a direct demonic assault. Their prescription is not medicine, but prayer. Masses are said for him around the clock. The most sacred relics in the kingdom are brought to his bedside and laid upon his frail body. You see a splinter of the true cross in a golden reliquary, the bones of St. Isidore, the patron saint of Madrid. They are trying to heal a genetic disorder with the power of faith. A desperate, hopeless attempt to petition heaven for a miracle. And then, as both medicine and traditional faith fail to produce any results, a third, more shadowy group of figures is summoned to the palace. The exorcists. The belief that the king was not merely sick, but bewitched, had been a whispered rumor for decades. Now, in the final, desperate years of his life, it becomes an official theory, embraced by a significant portion of the court, including, it is said, the king himself. You witness a scene that feels like it belongs in the darkest medieval fantasy. An exorcist named Fray Froilan Diaz, the confessor to the king, is put in charge of the investigation. He and his team of inquisitors begin a terrifying spiritual witch hunt. They are not looking for a disease. They are looking for a demon. They conduct elaborate exorcism rituals in the king's chambers, chanting prayers, sprinkling holy water, and demanding that the evil spirit reveal its name. The king, in a state of physical misery and mental confusion, is subjected to hours of intense, terrifying questioning. The exorcists believe that demons have entered his body through a cursed cup of chocolate, a gift from his mother, Mariana. Years ago, they tried to force him to vomit up the curse. In his delirium, Charles sometimes plays along, claiming to see spirits or feel a demonic presence within him. Was this a genuine belief on his part, or the confused ramblings of a very sick man being subjected to intense psychological pressure? It's a question historians still debate. He reportedly told the exorcists that his body felt as if it were burning from the inside. The whole affair spirals into a bizarre and dangerous political inquisition. The exorcists, led by Fray Diaz, start naming names. They accuse high-ranking political figures of being involved in the demonic plot, particularly those allied with the Queen, Maria Anna. The exorcism becomes a political weapon, a way for the anti-Austrian faction to attack the Queen and her German Camarilla. Fray Diaz even manages to exorcise a demon from a possessed nun, who conveniently confesses that Queen Maria Anna and her favorite, the Countess Lips, were the ones who had cursed the king. It's a horrifying spectacle of paranoia and fanaticism. The king's sick room has become a courtroom for a supernatural trial. The fate of the empire is being debated not by ministers in a council chamber, but by exorcists trying to cast out demons. For a time, it seems the entire government will be consumed by this madness. Eventually, the Inquisition itself has to step in, not to stop the exorcisms, but to investigate the exorcists for their own heretical excesses and political maneuvering. Fray Diaz is eventually arrested and disgraced, but the damage is done. The image of the bewitched king is now set in stone. He is no longer just a sick man. He is a cursed vessel, a battleground for celestial and demonic forces. And as you stand in the shadows of his room, watching the doctors with their lancets, the priests with their relics, and the exorcists with their crucifixes, you realize that none of them can save him. They are all just men, fumbling in the dark, trying to fight a curse that was written in his very DNA, long before he was ever born. In the midst of this chaotic storm of political intrigue and supernatural hysteria, there are moments of profound, almost unnerving quiet. You follow the king as he seeks refuge from the endless prodding of doctors, priests, and ministers. He finds his solace in the most morbid and unusual of places, the royal pantheon of the monastery of El Escorial. El Escorial is a vast, granite palace, monastery complex built by his ancestor, Sudopai I. It is a severe, imposing monument to Habsburg power and piety, and deep beneath its magnificent basilica lies the final resting place of the Spanish kings and queens. It is a circular, domed chamber of marble and bronze, lined with identical, ornate sarcophagi, stacked in niches along the walls. This is the Panteon de los Reyes, the Pantheon of the Kings, and for Charles II, it is the safest, most peaceful place on earth. You watch as he makes his slow, shuffling way down the marble staircase into the cold, silent air of the crypt. His attendants wait at a respectful distance. Here, surrounded by the dead, he seems to find a strange kind of comfort. These silent, sleeping ancestors do not demand anything of him. They do not pressure him to make a decision, to produce an heir, to be strong. They are simply there, a testament to the dynasty he is failing to continue. His visits to the Pantheon become a regular, almost obsessive habit. He is not just visiting, he is communing with his family. He has the keys to the sarcophagi, and he orders them opened. This is not a fanciful legend. It is a well-documented historical fact. He wishes to look upon the faces of his predecessors. You are there in the flickering torchlight as the heavy bronze lids are lifted. The air grows thick with the smell of dust and decay, of embalming herbs and the slow, patient work of time. Charles peers inside. He gazes upon the withered, mummified face of his great-grandfather, Philip I, the grim architect of this very place. He looks at his father, Philip IV, the man whose desperate choices led to his own fragile existence. But there is one tomb he returns to again and again, the sarcophagus of his first wife, the love of his life, Queen Marie Louise d'Orleans. He stands before it for long periods, lost in thought. On one famous occasion, he insists it be opened. 10 years have passed since her death. The attendants and monks protest, but the king is insistent. The lid is raised. According to the chroniclers of the time, her body was found to be remarkably well preserved. Charles, overcome with a wave of grief and memory, leans forward and kisses the cold forehead of his long-dead queen. It is an act of heartbreaking, Gothic tragedy, a moment of pure, unfiltered emotion from a man whose life is otherwise a carefully managed performance. Historians and psychologists have long been fascinated by this morbid hobby. What did it mean? Was it a sign of a deeply disturbed, necrophically sea mind, as some of his detractors claim? Or was it something more complex? Perhaps, in looking at the decay of his ancestors, he was confronting his own mortality, the rapid decay of his own body. Maybe he felt a kinship with these silent figures, feeling himself to be more a part of their world of endings than the world of the living. It's also possible to see it as a desperate search for identity. He was a king who could not rule, a man who could not be a husband in the full sense of the word. His life was a collection of failures. But here, in the crypt, he was undeniably a Habsburg. He was the current link in this long, golden chain. By looking at their faces, perhaps he was trying to understand who he was, where he came from, and why this terrible fate had been thrust upon him. You watch him as he gives the order for the tombs to be sealed again. The heavy lids fall back into place, the sound echoing in the silent dome. He turns and begins his slow ascent back to the world of the living. Back to the palace of whispers, back to the unbearable pressure of his crown. But for a few hours, here in the cold, quiet company of the dead, he has found a moment of peace, a brief respite from the curse that pursues him, a curse that he shares with every single soul sleeping in these marble boxes. As Charles communes with the ghosts of his ancestors in the cold silence of the crypt, the living world outside is growing loud and impatient. The king's morbid decline is no longer a secret whispered within the palace walls. It is the talk of Europe. You can almost feel the shift in the atmosphere, as if you're pulling back from the claustrophobic confines of the sick room to see a panoramic map of the continent. On this map, great armies are stirring, and the lines of borders seem to tremble with anticipation. The vultures are gathering. The great powers of Europe, France, the Holy Roman Empire, England, and the Dutch Republic, are no longer just plotting within the Spanish court. They are now actively preparing for the king's death, treating it not as a possibility, but as an imminent certainty. The Spanish Empire, for all its decay, is still the greatest prize on the world stage. It's a vast, global inheritance of lands, trade routes, and resources, and the idea that it might pass intact to either a French Bourbon or an Austrian Habsburg is a geopolitical nightmare for everyone else. Imagine yourself in a grand, wood-panelled room in London, or a bustling government office in The Hague. You see maps of the Spanish possessions spread out on a table. The men gathered around are not Spaniards. They are the calculating ministers of England's King William II and the leaders of the Dutch Republic. They are the great maritime powers, the trading nations. Their primary goal is to maintain the balance of power in Europe. If the mighty French crown were to merge with the vast Spanish Empire, France would become an unstoppable superpower, a universal monarchy that would dominate the continent and its trade. Likewise, if the Austrian Habsburgs were to reunite with their Spanish cousins, it would resurrect the empire of Charles V, once again encircling France and upsetting the delicate equilibrium. So, they begin a new, audacious game. They decide that if Spain will not choose a suitable heir, they will choose one for them. And if they cannot choose an heir, they will simply carve up the inheritance themselves. Light a tape. You are now a fly on the wall at a secret diplomatic meeting between French, English, and Dutch envoys. The air is thick with the smoke of clay pipes and the scent of sealing wax. They speak in low, conspiratorial tones. It is a breathtaking display of international cynicism. They are redrawing the map of the world, and the nation they are dismembering is not even in the room. They don't consult the Spanish government. They don't ask what the Spanish people want. They treat the Spanish Empire as a passive, inanimate object to be divided up for their own convenience and security. Their first idea is a masterpiece of diplomatic compromise. They agree to support the third candidate, the young Bavarian prince, Joseph Ferdinand. He is the perfect solution. He's a Habsburg on his mother's side, which might placate the traditionalists in Spain. But he's not a direct heir to the Austrian throne. And he's not a French Bourbon. His accession would place a new, independent dynasty on the Spanish throne, neatly solving the balance of power problem. This plan gains a surprising amount of traction. Even King Charles in Madrid, in a rare moment of lucidity and decisiveness, is persuaded that this is the best way to keep his beloved empire intact. He secretly writes a will, naming the young Bavarian boy as his sole heir. For a moment, it looks like a peaceful solution has been found. The great war that everyone fears might just be averted. But fate, in this story, has a cruel and recurring sense of irony. Just as the secret treaty is being finalized, just as Europe begins to breathe a collective sigh of relief, news arrives from Brussels like a thunderclap. The young prince, Joseph Ferdinand, the 6-year-old boy who was supposed to be the savior of Europe, has died suddenly of smallpox. The compromise candidate is gone. The carefully constructed solution lies in ruins, and the situation is now more dangerous than ever before. The two main claimants, the French and the Austrian, are left staring each other down, with no middle ground left between them. The vultures, having been briefly shooed away from the feast, now return with a renewed, ravenous hunger. The quiet, diplomatic maneuvering is about to end, and the drums of war are beginning to beat, faintly but unmistakably, on the horizon. The sudden death of the Bavarian prince sends a shockwave through the courts of Europe. The neat, peaceful solution has vanished overnight. The secret meeting rooms in London, Paris, and The Hague are hastily reconvened. The maps are unrolled once more. The mood is no longer one of clever compromise. It is one of grim necessity. The spectre of a massive, continent-spanning war looms larger than ever. If they cannot agree on a single heir, then the only alternative to war is to slice up the empire in advance. You are present for the birth of the Second Partition Treaty. It is an even more cynical and audacious document than the first. With the compromise candidate gone, the great powers decide to simply divide the spoils between the two remaining heavyweights, the French Bourbons and the Austrian Habsburgs. Spain, once again, is not consulted. The Spanish ambassador to London only learns of the treaty's existence through court gossip, a profound and deliberate insult to the pride of his nation. You watch as the diplomats haggle over territories like merchants in a bazaar. The main prize, Spain itself, along with its overseas colonies in the Americas and the Philippines, and the Spanish Netherlands, will go to the Austrian candidate, Archduke Charles. To compensate the French, the Bourbon candidate, Philip of Anjou, will be given all of Spain's rich Italian possessions, Naples, Sicily, and Milan. On paper, it seems like a logical, if ruthless, solution. It prevents either France or Austria from getting everything, thus preserving the precious balance of power. England and the Dutch Republic are satisfied because it keeps the French from controlling Spain's vast colonial trade network. France is satisfied because it gains wealthy Italian territories, strengthening its southeastern border. Austria is satisfied because a Habsburg will once again sit on the Spanish throne. Everyone who matters, it seems, gets something. Everyone. That is, except Spain. When news of this secret treaty finally leaks to Madrid, the reaction is one of absolute, incandescent fury. You can feel the wave of indignation that sweeps through the Spanish court, uniting, for the first time, all the warring factions, the French party, the Austrian party, the Queen, the Grandees. They are all united in their outrage. To them, this is the ultimate humiliation. For centuries, Spain had been the dominant power in Europe, a nation that dictated terms to others. Now, these other nations, these heretics and upstarts, are arrogantly carving up the sacred Spanish inheritance as if it were their own, while the king is still alive. The pride of the Spanish grandees is a force to be reckoned with. They may fight amongst themselves for influence over the king, but they are united in one unshakable belief: the Spanish Empire is indivisible. It is a sacred trust, handed down by God, and it must be passed on whole to the next legitimate heir. The idea of giving Naples to France, or Milan to Austria, is not just a political concession. It is a sacrilege, a betrayal of their history and their identity. This popular outrage in Spain completely changes the political calculus. The partition treaty, designed to prevent war, now makes war almost inevitable. The Spanish people and their ruling class will never accept the dismemberment of their empire. This gives Louis XVI of France a new, powerful card to play. He can now present himself not as a predator, seeking to tear Spain apart, but as a protector, the only one who can honor the Spanish desire to keep the empire whole. The debate among historians is lively on this point. Was Louis XVI being sincere, or was this a brilliant piece of political opportunism? Did he ever intend to honor the partition treaty, or was he always playing a double game, secretly aiming for the entire prize? His actions are a masterclass in ambiguity. He signs the treaty with England and Holland, but at the same time, his ambassador in Madrid is working tirelessly to convince the Spanish council that the Duke of Anjou, his grandson, is the only candidate powerful enough to inherit the throne and hold the empire together against the partitions. You can feel the end game approaching. The great diplomatic game is reaching its climax. In London and The Hague, they believe they have secured the peace with a clever piece of paper. But in Madrid, that same piece of paper has had the opposite effect. It has pushed the Spanish court towards a desperate, all or nothing gamble. They would rather risk war for the entire empire under a new dynasty than accept a managed peace that involves giving up a single province. The treaty designed to steal an empire has instead made the empire a prize that must be won, not divided, and the final decision now rests where it always has, in the hands of the dying man at the center of the storm. The dawn of the year 1700 breaks over Madrid, grey and cold. The new century arrives not with a bang, but with a death watch. All of Europe is now holding its breath, its eyes fixed on a single, dimly lit room in the Royal Alcazar. Inside that room, King Charles II is entering the final stage of his long, painful decline. You are a silent presence by his bedside. The man lying in the enormous, canopy-draped bed bears little resemblance to a king, or even to a man in his late 30s. He is a withered, shrunken figure. His body is racked by seizures, his mind clouded by long periods of delirium. His legs and face are swollen with edema, a sign of failing kidneys. He is almost completely bald. His eyesight is failing, and he can barely stand. The doctors, having exhausted their brutal repertoire of bleeding essence purges, can do little more than offer him sips of water and murmur prayers. The political factions, the French and the Austrians, have played their last cards. The Queen, Maria Anna, hovers near him, a constant, hawk-like presence, trying to use her dwindling moments of influence to steer his wavering mind toward her Austrian nephew. The head of the Spanish Council, Cardinal Porto Carrero, a powerful and shrewd politician who has become convinced that only a French successor can save the empire, waits for his own moment to whisper in the king's ear. The pressure on Charles is unimaginable. He is a man in constant, agonizing pain, his body failing him in a dozen different ways. And yet he is being asked to make the single most important decision of the last 100 years. The fate of millions, the map of the world, the peace of a continent. It all rests on the final testament of a man who, on most days, is barely lucid. You witness moments of heartbreaking clarity, brief windows in the fog of his illness where the king seems to understand the full, terrible weight of his burden. He is consumed by two overwhelming emotions: a deep, pious fear for the salvation of his own soul, and a desperate, almost fanatical desire to keep the empire united. He sees the partition treaties not just as a political humiliation, but as a sin, a violation of the sacred trust he received from his father. He believes he will be judged by God if he allows the inheritance to be broken apart. In a last, desperate attempt to find a divine answer, he agrees to a shocking proposal from Cardinal Porto Carrero. The cardinal suggests they consult the Pope. A secret envoy is sent to Rome to ask Pope Innocent XII for his holy guidance. The question is put to him: in order to ensure the peace of Christendom and the salvation of the king's soul, who should inherit the Spanish throne? The Pope, a wise and politically astute figure, is in a difficult position, but his own interests in Italy are threatened by the Austrian Habsburgs. After a period of prayer and consultation, he sends his answer back to Madrid. His advice, cloaked in the language of spiritual guidance, is politically explosive. He advises Charles that the legitimate heirs are the children of his sister, and therefore the French claimant has the strongest case. He recommends that Charles bequeath the entire, undivided empire to the grandson of Louis XIV. This papal decree is a thunderbolt. It gives Cardinal Portocarrero and the pro-French faction the ultimate weapon. The backing of God's own vicar on earth. They present this to the king. You can see the conflict, the agony, on Charles's face. All his life, he's been pulled towards his Austrian family, a loyalty reinforced daily by his German wife. But now, the Pope himself is telling him that the path to salvation lies with France. His duty to God and his duty to keep the empire united are pointing in the same direction. The debate still rages among historians. How much was Charles truly convinced by the Pope's advice, and how much was he simply a dying man, too weak to resist the immense pressure being applied by the powerful Cardinal Portocarrero? We will never know for sure, but we can see the outcome. In early October of 1700, the king, weak and trembling, gives his consent. A new will is to be drawn up, the most important last will and testament in modern history. The dying man has made his choice. The atmosphere in the palace becomes electric with a silent, secret urgency. The king has made his decision, but the act itself must be performed with the utmost secrecy. Queen Maria Anna and her Austrian faction must not find out until it is too late. If they discover that Charles is about to sign away the empire to their arch-rivals, they might attempt a last-ditch coup, or even try to seize the king's person. The final act of this long drama must be played out in the shadows. You are in a small, private office, late at night. The only light comes from a single flickering candle. Cardinal Portocarrero and a handful of trusted counselors and notaries are gathered around a table. A scribe, his hand moving with painstaking care, is drafting the final version of the will. Every word, every phrase, is of monumental importance. There can be no ambiguity, no loophole that could be challenged later. The central clause is devastating in its simplicity and scope. It revokes all previous wills. It condemns the partition treaties as a violation of the laws of God and man. And then, it names a single, universal heir to the entire, undivided Spanish monarchy, from Europe to the Americas to the Philippines. That heir is Philip, Duke of Anjou, second grandson of King Louis XIV of France. But there is a crucial condition, a clause designed to appease the fears of the rest of Europe. The will stipulates that the crowns of France and Spain must never be united on a single head. If Philip were ever to inherit the French throne, he would have to renounce his Spanish one in favor of his younger brother. It's a legal firewall, an attempt to get a French king without getting a Franco-Spanish superstate. Once the document is prepared, the most delicate part of the operation begins. It must be signed by the king. You follow Cardinal Portocarrero as he carries the heavy parchment, its ink still drying, to the royal bedchamber. The queen has been cleverly lured away on some pretext. The guards at the door are loyal to the cardinal. The room is quiet, save for the king's shallow, labored breathing. They prop Charles up in his bed with pillows. He is barely conscious, drifting in undoubt of a feverish delirium. The cardinal speaks to him in a low, soothing voice, reminding him of his duty, of the Pope's advice, of the salvation of his soul. He places the quill in the king's trembling hand. You watch this moment, a scene of profound and tragic significance. This man, who has never truly ruled, who has been a phantom on the throne for his entire life, is now performing the single most powerful act of his reign. His hand is so weak that a notary has to guide it, to help him form the shaky, spittery letters of his signature. Yoel Rey, I the king. As soon as the signature is complete and the wax seal is affixed, the document is rushed away and placed in a secure location. The conspirators can breathe again. The deed is done. For a few more weeks. The court continues its charade. The Queen and the Austrian ambassador remain unaware of the bombshell that has been prepared. They continue to hover around the king, still hoping for a last-minute change of heart. A deathbed confession in their favor. They are living in a world that no longer exists. They are fighting a war that has already been lost. Historians have long praised this as a masterpiece of statecraft by Cardinal Portocarrero. He managed to steer the ship of state through a hurricane of international pressure and domestic intrigue, achieving the one goal the Spanish elite desired: the preservation of the empire's unity. But it is a somber masterpiece, painted on a canvas of human misery. The central figure in this triumph is the tragic king himself. His final conscious act was to sign a document that he likely only partially understood. A decision shaped by a lifetime of physical suffering and spiritual fear. He has done his duty. He has, in his own way, saved the empire from dismemberment. But the price of that unity will be staggering. The will, designed to prevent the empire from being torn apart by diplomats, will instead ensure that it becomes the prize in a massive, bloody, continent-spanning war. His signature does not secure the peace. It is the starting gun for the War of the Spanish Succession. The signature on the will seems to have been the last flicker of King Charles II's life force, having performed this final, monumental act. He lets go. The weeks that follow are a slow, inexorable slide into the final darkness. He is racked with fever, unable to keep down any food. He sinks into a coma, his breathing growing ever more shallow. The palace of black clothes holds its breath one last time, no longer for a birth, but for a death. You are there in the royal bedchamber on the 1st of November. Yao Min. It is All Saints' Day, a day of solemn religious observance. The room is crowded with the highest figures of the realm. Cardinal Portocarrero, the grandees of the council, the royal physicians. Queen Maria Anna is kneeling at the foot of the bed, her face a mask of weary defeat. The air is heavy with the scent of incense and the low murmur of the prayers for the dying. Outside the palace, the life of Madrid goes on, but a sense of foreboding hangs over the city. Everyone knows the king is dying. Everyone knows that his last breath will be the signal for a profound and terrifying change. The end of an era is not just approaching. It is here, in this room. At a few minutes before 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the royal confessors administer the last rites. A hush falls over the room. There is only the sound of a faint, rattling breath, and then there is silence. The chief physician steps forward, leans over the king, and performs his final duty. He straightens up and makes the formal, quiet announcement: the king is dead. Charles II, thou he do. The Bewitched One, the last Habsburg king of Spain, has breathed his last. He is just a few days short of his 39th birthday. His life, a long and painful struggle against his own body, is finally over. In that moment, a strange and profound stillness settles over the room. The political maneuvering, the years of whispered conspiracies, the desperate prayers and the quack remedies, it has all come to this. A still, silent figure on a bed. The curse, woven into the fabric of his dynasty through generations of inward-looking pride, has finally run its course. The Spanish Habsburg line, which had ruled a global empire for nearly 200 years, is extinct. Immediately, the machinery of state, which had been poised and waiting for this very moment, clicks into motion. Cardinal Portocarrero takes command. He orders the palace sealed. No one is to enter or leave. He sends a dispatch rider on the fastest horse available, thundering out of Madrid on the long road to Paris, carrying the explosive news for King Louis XIV. The will, the kingdom's greatest secret, is brought forth. The royal council is convened. You are there as the doors are sealed and the document, with its heavy wax seal, is presented. A notary breaks the seal and begins to read the will aloud. His voice is steady and clear, but every word drops into the stunned silence of the room like a stone. You can see the face of the Queen, Maria Anna, as she hears the fateful clause. Her face, already pale with grief and exhaustion, turns to stone. She hears her nephew, the Austrian Archduke, completely passed over. She hears the name of the French prince, Philip of Anjou, declared the sole and universal heir. It is the confirmation of her ultimate defeat, her years of political struggle, her every effort to control the king and secure the throne for her family. All of it is turned to ash. The reading of the will marks the true end. The death of the king was a biological fact. This is the political reality that flows from it. The ghost of the last Habsburg has just bequeathed his vast, magnificent, and troubled empire to the arch-enemies of his house. An autopsy is performed on the king's body, a final, morbid attempt to understand the source of his lifelong torment. The report is a shocking catalogue of pathologies. The physicians note that his heart is the size of a peppercorn, his lungs are corroded, his intestines are gangrenous, his kidneys contain large stones, and his head is full of water. Famously, the report concludes that his body did not contain a single drop of blood. It is, of course, a medical exaggeration, but it is a powerful, poetic summary of his existence. He was a king, a dynasty, drained of all life and vitality, an empty vessel waiting for the end. The boy who was born to rot has finally fulfilled his tragic destiny. The news of the king's death and the contents of his will spread across Europe like a lit fuse. The dispatch rider from Madrid reaches the palace of Versailles. You are in the magnificent Hall of Mirrors as a courtier brings the sealed message to King Louis XIV. The Sun King, the most powerful monarch in Europe, reads the document. He now faces a monumental choice, one that will define his reign and shape the future of the continent. He can accept the terms of the partition treaty he signed with England, the Dutch Republic. This is the safe, peaceful option. It would give his grandson the Italian territories and grant the larger prize of Spain and its colonies to the Austrians. It would avoid a war. Or he can accept the terms of Charles II's will. This would mean claiming the entire Spanish Empire for his grandson, Philip of Anjou. It would be a staggering, unprecedented consolidation of Bourbon power, but he knows, with absolute certainty, that it will mean war. The rest of Europe will not stand by and allow France to gain such an immense prize without a fight. For a few days, Louis deliberates. The court at Versailles holds its breath. Then, he summons the Spanish ambassador and his grandson, the handsome 17-year-old Philip. In a grand, theatrical gesture, Louis declares, "Gentlemen, you may salute the King of Spain. He has made his choice. He has accepted the will. He is choosing the whole inheritance, and with it, the certainty of a massive war, his famous, and perhaps apocryphal, declaration to his grandson. He'll end wire plus D Peries. There are no more Peries," signals his intent. The two great kingdoms are now to be united in a family alliance. The reaction from the other powers is swift and furious. In Vienna, the Holy Roman Emperor, Leopold I, is enraged. He feels betrayed. The Spanish throne, he believes, belongs to the Habsburgs by right of blood. He immediately begins to mobilize his armies to fight for the claim of his son, the Archduke Charles. In London and The Hague, King William II and the Dutch leaders are equally furious. They have been played for fools by Louis XIV. He has torn up the partition treaty. They see the prospect of a Bourbon superpower dominating Europe and its trade, and they to begin to prepare for war. A grand alliance is formed between the Holy Roman Empire, England, and the Dutch Republic, later to be joined by Prussia, Portugal, and Savoy. The ghost of Charles II now presides over the very thing he sought to avoid, a conflict that will tear his world apart. The War of the Spanish Succession begins. It is a truly global conflict, the first of its kind. You see the flash of cannons and the march of armies not just in Europe, but on the high seas and in the distant colonies of North America, where it is known as Queen Anne's War. The war is a brutal, bloody, 13-year slog. Great battles are fought at Blenheim, Ramillies, and Malplaquet. Legendary generals like the Duke of Marlborough for the Grand Alliance and the Duke of Villars for France become household names. The prize is the Ghost's Throne, the magnificent inheritance of the lost Spanish Habsburg. You can see the two young men who are the rival kings, the dueling figureheads of this titanic struggle. In Madrid, Philippe V, the French Bourbon, tries to win over his new Spanish subjects. He is a competent, if an inspiring, ruler. Meanwhile, the Austrian claimant, Archduke Charles, lands in Spain with an allied army and is proclaimed Charles III by his supporters in Catalonia and Valencia. For several years, Spain becomes a battlefield itself. A bitter civil war between factions loyal to the Bourbon king and those loyal to the Habsburg pretender. The war rages on, year after year, with immense loss of life and treasure. The fortunes of each side ebb and flow. At times it seems the Grand Alliance will be victorious and the Bourbons will be driven from Spain. At other times, the French and Spanish armies rally. The conflict drains the resources of every nation involved. Ironically, the final resolution of the war comes not from a great battle, but from another unexpected death. In 1711, the Holy Roman Emperor dies. His heir is none other than his son, the Archduke Charles, the Austrian claimant to the Spanish throne. Suddenly, the entire strategic situation is reversed. If the Grand Alliance wins now, Archduke Charles will be both Holy Roman Emperor and King of Spain. He would resurrect the empire of Charles V, creating a Habsburg superpower. For England and the Dutch, this is just as bad, if not worse, than a Bourbon one. The balance of power, the very principle they went to war to defend, is threatened by their own candidate. Their war aims change overnight. They lose their appetite for the fight and open peace negotiations with France. The war for the Ghost's Throne winds down, not with a climactic victory, but with a weary, pragmatic compromise. The very thing they had all been fighting about for over a decade. The long, bloody war finally gutters out, not with a single, decisive trumpet blast, but with the scratching of quills on parchment in the Dutch city of Utrecht. The year is 1713. The great powers, exhausted and indebted by more than a decade of conflict, have come to the table to formally end the War of the Spanish Succession. The peace they broker is a grand, pragmatic, and ultimately ironic compromise. You are a silent observer at the signing of the Treaty of Utrecht. The document, and the series of treaties that follow, essentially ratifies a version of the very partition they had all gone to war to prevent. Philippe V, the French Bourbon, is officially recognized by all as the King of Spain and its American colonies. The Bourbon dynasty that he founded will rule Spain for centuries, and in fact, still sits on the Spanish throne today. Louis XIV has succeeded in his primary goal. A friendly, allied Bourbon power is now established south of the Pyrenees. But the price for this recognition is steep. The Spanish Empire, which Charles II had given his last ounce of will to preserve whole, is dismembered. Spain is forced to cede all of its remaining European territories. The Spanish Netherlands, Milan, Naples, and Sardinia are handed over to the Austrian Habsburgs. Sicily goes to the Duke of Savoy. And most significantly for the future, Spain cedes to key strategic footholds to its old enemy, Great Britain, the island of Minorca in the Mediterranean, and a rocky, insignificant peninsula at the very southern tip of Spain itself, Gibraltar. Britain also wins the Ociento, the hugely lucrative contract to supply enslaved Africans to the Spanish colonies, a dark but vital component of its rising commercial power. The result is a new map of Europe. The age of Spanish dominance is definitively over. France, though victorious in placing a Bourbon on the throne, is financially shattered by the war and has been contained. The big winner of the conflict is Great Britain, which emerges with a stronger navy, new trade routes, and key naval bases that will help it build a global empire of its own. The old dream of a universal monarchy, whether Habsburg or Bourbon, is dead. The new era will be defined by the principle that Charles's death brought so violently to the forefront: the balance of power. And what of the boy king who started it all? His body lies in the cold marble pantheon at El Escorial, among the ancestors he so resembled and so tragically failed to emulate. His name, Charles I, becomes a byword for impotence, decay, and the dangers of royal inbreeding. He is remembered not for what he did, but for what he was: the last, weakest, and most pathetic link in a mighty chain. Historians still debate his legacy. Was he merely a footnote, a biological accident at the end of a dynasty, or was his life, in its own strange way, one of the most consequential of the early modern period? It's a fascinating question. His personal tragedy, the curse written in his genes, did not happen in a vacuum. It acted as a catalyst, accelerating the decline of a great empire and forcing a violent reordering of the entire European power structure. He was a passive king, a phantom on the throne, and yet his death triggered a truly global war and reshaped the world. As you stand in the quiet of the Pantheon, you can almost see his ghost, a small, frail boy in a vast, echoing hall. He is no longer the bewitched one, the object of pity and scorn. He is just a quiet presence, a reminder of a story so strange it feels like a dark fairy tale. A story about how the most intimate choices of a family, their decision to turn their bloodline inward upon itself, could have consequences that ripple outwards for centuries, toppling thrones, redrawing maps, and defining the destinies of nations they would never see. The boy who was born to rot became the accidental architect of a new world, a world built upon the ashes of his own magnificent, crumbling, and cursed inheritance. And so, our story of the bewitched king, of a palace of shadows and a dying dynasty, comes to its quiet and gentle close. The great wars have been fought, the treaties have been signed, and the ghost of the last Spanish Habsburg can finally rest in the cold marble of his tomb. His story, once so loud with the clash of armies and the whispers of courtiers, now fades into the deep and peaceful silence of the past. You can feel that silence beginning to fill your own space now. The echoes of history are growing faint, replaced by the soft, gentle rhythm of your own breathing. Allow each breath to be a soft wave, washing away the remnants of the story, washing away the remnants of the day, leaving only a sense of calm, a sense of quiet, a sense of peaceful release. You are drifting now, on a common silent sea, under a sky full of distant, sweeping stars. There are no more choices to be made, no more fates to be decided. There is only this moment of profound and easy rest. The story has done its work, and now it recedes, leaving you in this safe and comfortable harbor, at the very edge of a deep and restorative sleep. The curtain falls on this peaceful scene, for those still in the audience. The next play is ready to begin whenever you are. Good night.